everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Hello, Rush Nation, and welcome to the 5 Yard Dynasty podcast. I am your host, as always, Liam, or at the FSA Tweets on Twitter. Now, before we dive into the second episode in our Sophomore Scrutiny series, I'm going to hand it over to Rich. So, first of all, Rich, how are you doing? And I know that you have a plug that you want to do at the start, not the end of the episode. So first of all, how are you doing? Second of all, plug away.
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. I thought I wasn't going to get an introduction then. It was just going to just move swiftly into the pod. I'm very good, thank you very much. So just I mentioned it right at the end of last week's pod. I think most people probably switched off because we'd started waffling. But yeah, I just want to say, as I said last week, I've launched it's not a listener league, it's more of a dynasty league just for listeners. So we've got 5 people in at the moment, hoping to make it a 16-teamer. So if you're interested, will be a free league with a little prize for the winner. So yeah, please drop me a DM, whether that be on Twitter or Twitter. None of you have got my mobile number, I hope. And then we'll get you added. Into the show, Liam.
Does that mean that I'm special because I've got your phone number?
Well, you've got one phone number. You've not got my important phone number.
Sound like a drug dealer there, mate.
Yeah, drug dealer. Yeah.
Anyway, mate, let's start talking about you being a drug dealer and your alternate life, because I'm sure this is separate from your personal. And let's dive straight into the Sophomore Scrutiny series. Last week, we did the quarterbacks and the tight ends from the 2021 class. This week, surprise, we're going to the running back position. Who'd have thought? Who'd have guessed? Such a surprise. You can all put your shocked faces away now. And Rich, we'll dive straight into it. Let's go Nargie Harris. First running back off the board. The only first round running back from last year's class. Oh, no. I've just noticed the other name. 2. So he's one of the 2 running backs that were taken in the first round last year. And he was arguably the running back 1 or running back 2, or if someone was feeling a bit spicy, the running back 3 in this class for fantasy purposes. So, Rich, Nargie Harris, take it away, mate. He's currently going as RB2 or 3 in most Superflex drafts or drafts in general right now.
Yeah, it was an interesting one last year, wasn't it? I think, some people, the majority of people leaned Harris. I think some people were out on the Travis Etienne island. I think I flirted with it, but I think I finally settled on Harris being the one. And look, he had a fantastic year. However you look at it, I think just in terms of sheer volume, absolutely mind blowing. That 83% opportunity share is, 20 points higher than anyone else in this class really last year. So, he was the Pittsburgh running game pretty much all year. Almost touched 300 rushing attempts in a rookie year is pretty impressive. But what he did with it was also very good. I think that Steelers offensive line was pretty awful, but still managed to plug out, some decent yards before contact and things like that. But I think the thing that most impressed me with him last year was the receiving work. 90 targets. That's outrageous when you think of Alvin Kamara being touted as a receiving back and hitting that 81 number 3 years on the trot, and Nigel Harris kind of blowing that out of the water. Yes, it was largely buoyed because he had, I think it was it a 20 target game he had at one point in the middle of the season?
19. I looked last week, but yeah, 19.
And yeah, I mean, that was huge. So slightly skews the numbers, but when you've got Big Ben who couldn't throw the ball more than 5 yards without a wobble, that was going to be, I think, moving forward, as you said, he's kind of running back 2, running back 3 in terms of consensus at the moment. There's been slight improvements in the offensive line with Pittsburgh. I don't think it's been any wholesale changes that are going to turn it into an elite offensive line overnight, but you'd like to think that hopefully with a quarterback that can actually throw the ball further than 5 yards, it might open up running lanes for him a little bit. And there's certainly going to be no competition in the backfield to share with him. So yeah, he's my running back 3, and I think he's as safe a bet as you can make at running back outside of Jonathan Taylor. To be honest, he might not have overall running back 1 upside. I think last year he finished as the running back 3, and I think that's probably his ceiling. But yeah, he feels like a very safe floor elite running back. What about you, Lim?
Yeah, I'm very similar. I don't see anyone particularly looking to take those touches away from him, those opportunities. At the moment, the next on the depth chart is Benny Snell. They did take, what is his name, Anthony McFarland a few years back, but he's not showing anything. So other than Nargi, there's nothing there at running back. Maybe they bring in a veteran just to take a little bit of the workload and be a bit more of an insurance. But Pittsburgh have always been a workhorse team, and I don't see that changing. Nargi is going to be the workhorse for next year, or this coming up year. So, yeah, I think it is a very safe running back 2 in Dynasty in total. At the moment, I've got him as running back 2, and I can't foresee that changing all the way up until the start of the season.
Do you think, for me, he's a player that I've literally not seen moved all off season? I think people that have him are quite happy to have him and value him as that running back 2, but I can't see anybody paying the kind of 2 firsts plus to go and get him. I think people are just sort of, yeah, he's good, but he's not, Jonathan Taylor. So I'm just going to leave him sat there and not even try and buy him.
I think it probably is because he's at the top of that tier after Jonathan Taylor that people aren't going near him or trying to trade him. I did get him in one league. Let me find out what that trade was. But I did get him in one league at the start of the season after the startup. So it was Nargi and 2 firsts, which I'll go and check which first they were. But Nargi for 2 firsts is basically what you're having to pay for him. I'm not like massively out there with that. I think that's about right.
I think I'd need more
on his value.
I think I'd need more. I think I'd need probably a second on top to make. If we're talking 2023 firsts, I think I'd take 2. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Yeah, I think I'd probably take 2 firsts and a second. I think 2 firsts probably wouldn't be enough for me to sell in most situations. Obviously, every league's slightly different, but yeah, I think I'd need more.
I'm just trying to figure out what first they were, because unfortunately Sleeper doesn't tell me that in their transaction history.
No worries. Shall we move on to the next guy, Liam? So quite a challenging back in terms of didn't have a rookie season, was obviously very hyped, got to go and play with his college quarterback, but Liz Frank injury meant he's been on the shelf. There's stories that he's going to be good to go for OTAs and he's going to be good and healthy to go in the next few weeks. And that's, of course, Travis Etienne. So what do you think about Travis Etienne? Obviously, we didn't see that rookie year. Do you think it could be a good buy window? Do you think it could be potentially someone to get up in the sort of same level that we're valuing Nigel Harris at the moment?
I don't think I'd put him at this top tier. I think he's the slight tier below, so about RB6, just after Breece Hall or Javonte Williams, however you got those around, Rich. I can't remember. I think you've got Breece Hall ahead, but yeah, I think he's in that tier 3, or has the upside of that tier 3 at least. I think with this injury, it's kind of soured the taste of a lot of people on him. But right now, I think he's quite an underrated player, his ADP. I've been seeing him go as the RB 17, 18 plus, and I quite like him for that upside over a couple of others. For example, and this is probably going to get me absolutely slaughtered on Twitter. But J.K. Dobbins, I would take Etienne over Dobbins at the moment just because of that. Like, it sounds weird, but because of that unknown, I think with Dobbins, you've got a lot of backfield, not controversy, but a lot of threats in that opportunity share. Whereas Etienne has Robinson, which yes, Lawrence wanted Robinson on the field more, but that was because he was getting Carlos Hyde on the field over Robinson. It's not because Robinson is an absolute next world back. I think with Etienne as well being with the quarterback of his college career, then that's going to help him even more. And as we said last week with Lawrence, that whole situation was awful for the Jaguars team. And with Doug Peterson, I'm more inclined to see an uptick in that entire offense, and that's going to benefit Etienne. My one concern with Etienne is Doug Peterson has shown that he prefers a more committee approach at the running back position, and they have a volume running back in terms of James Robinson. And does that mean that James Robinson is going to take more than we expect from him, or more than we expect in terms of that backfield? I don't know, but I really like Etienne's upside for where he's being drafted right now. Where are you standing on Etienne, especially at ADP, Rich?
Yeah, so I think I was a big Etienne believer last year. I think, with my running backs, I love that movable piece aspect. I love the receiving game usage, and he is that. He's not a guy that's, just going to line up in the backfield and be a 2-down back and you forget about him. I think had he been in this year's class, he'd have probably been my 102. I certainly would have had him over Kenneth Walker as a prospect. I think the fact now we've lost a year of that rookie contract and he's obviously not done anything for a year, I'd now have Kenneth Walker above him. But I think he is still an elite prospect. I think he is still, an explosive athlete that can take the ball to the house anywhere on the field, quite frankly. And I think that he's going to be utilised in an offense that will line him up all over the field. I think we are going to see him, not used huge amounts as a wide receiver. This isn't JD McKissick, but I wouldn't be shocked if he had a, 10-15% snap share out as a wide receiver, used out of that slot and that kind of thing. And that to me is exciting. And I think it hints at a potential, high upside. He's my RB16. I've got him in the same tier as J.K. Dobbins, Cam Akers, Antonio Gibson. To me, this is kind of I don't really know what to do with them tier as running backs. Of above them, I've got 14 guys that I feel pretty confident are going to produce, solid numbers as a kind of RB1 or fringe RB1. And then Dobbins, Etienne, Akers, Gibson. I could see all of them finishing as a, potential top 5 back next year, but I could equally see all of them not finishing as a top 24 back. So I think it's kind of what's your flavour, to steal a Craig David song that you're probably too young to even know what I'm talking about. But I think when you get to this point in the draft, as you said, you're looking at J.K. Dobbins, Travis Etienne, Cam Akers, Antonio Gibson, and it's a risk reward whichever way you go. And probably we'll sit here in a year's time and 2 of them will be studs and 2 of them will look completely disappointed. And I'll be honest, I hold my hands up and say I don't have a clue which 2 it's going to be. So hang on. I think. Sorry, I was just going to say let's just stick on a point there quickly. You're telling me you have no idea what Craig David, what your flavour is?
If I say yes, am I going to get absolutely slaughtered?
No. I expect you to know. So have you heard of that song?
Right. Let's put it this way. You could name a song that I listened to in my childhood on repeat, and I probably wouldn't know the name of it because I'm absolutely awful with song names and song lyrics. Song artists. However, I'm actually pretty good when I know the lyrics. I just don't ever pay attention to a song name or a song artist because I like the song. I don't really need to know who sung it or what it's called. So I don't know it by name. However, if we were to have played it on the stream, then I'm pretty sure I'd have been all right and probably would have known it.
I mean, yeah, that's pretty much the lyrics in terms of it's Craig David and he sings, "What's your flavour? Tell me what's your flavour."
Can we get a live rendition?
No, that's as much as you're getting. So yeah, the
So-
fact you didn't know it, we'll move on.
Okay. I was going to move us on anyway. So just coming back to the point on Etienne, I think with all of that tier, I think you can see them go in, or the range of outcomes is kind of like a CEH at the moment, where Clyde Edwards-Helaire is basically not valued at all in the Dynasty community, and that's in part his high expectations going into his rookie year not coming through, as well as having an injury last year and having Darrell Williams take over a lot of that workload, because by the looks of it, Clyde Edwards-Helaire wasn't healthy coming back from that injury. But I can see all of them drop into that sort of value in this tier. Equally, as you said, you can see a bunch of them going up and becoming the next youngish running back, mid running back ones that are taking over from those 26, 27-year-olds that are a little bit pushing on the older side, as we've spoken about on the Fantasy Wildcard Streamathon on Saturday. If you haven't watched it, there's 16 hours. We're at the second hour, so that tells you where we are. But check it out if you haven't. Anyway, I'm not going to plug any more, Rich. Third running back on our list, third taken, it was in the second round, and it was Javonte Williams. Now, he was my running back 2. I know a guy in one of my leagues that had him running back 1. He was extremely high on him, and called him Javonte Bay, who is extremely high on Javonte Williams. I wasn't as high, but I really liked him, and I thought him and Nargie Harris were closer than people thought. And his value, Javonte Williams' value, has skyrocketed. And I don't think that was necessarily... I don't think the Melvin Gordon expectancy to be signed was really brought into that at the start of this offseason. I don't know about you, Rich, but I haven't seen a real change in the value, but I've seen people less willing to sell him now rather than at the start of the offseason since that Melvin Gordon signing. So, Rich, let's talk about this in 2 steps. We've got this season, which is what Melvin Gordon has signed for, because last season when they were both playing for the Broncos, they had basically a 50-50 snap share. That the Broncos were extremely good at keeping that 50-50 snap share. If you look at most of their games, it will be very close to 50-50, if not 50-50 between them. So do you expect that this year? Do you expect anything else from Javonte now that they've got an upgrade at quarterback? And then the second part to that question is, what do you see for the future? Maybe when Melvin Gordon has gone, do you see him always being in a 1A, 1B situation like he is for the first 2 years of his career? Or do you expect him to take a workhorse role or have someone small coming back in, kind of like a Nargie Harris style situation anyway?
Yeah, I really like Javonte Williams, the player. I think he's a fantastic back. I think he's got the potential to be incredible. But I think the hype got a little bit too far. This is a guy that some people were holding up as the RB2 in terms of Dynasty, yet only finished as the RB24 in terms of points per game last year. And yes, I get that he was sharing a backfield with Melvin Gordon, but he still had a 50% opportunity share. Let's not pretend that that's tiny. Most elite fantasy backs will be around that 60 to 70%. Like, he wasn't miles away. I'm a little bit concerned that Melvin Gordon is back. I think, to me, that shows that Denver want him to be part of a 1A, 1B. Yes, I think he'll probably tip towards more that sort of 60% opportunity share with Melvin Gordon taking a slightly reduced role. But I think the price, you've probably missed your sell window, but the price got crazy high 2 months ago. I don't hate him. He's still my RB6 in terms of where I got him ranked. I think he's got the potential to be a league winner, and he's the young guy that I've got ahead of the Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, Nick Chubb, Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry tier because of that youth piece. And I think he could be fantastic. But I am a little bit concerned that he's only ever going to be a 1A and never just be a true 1, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I think for this year, you're probably looking for a little bit more. Like you said, probably a 60% target share and therefore more points. But you're probably looking at mid running back 1 range, running back 2 range. Is that what you're thinking for fantasy points wise?
Yeah. I think I'd project him to be a fringe RB1 this year. Because that sort of 8 to 15 range is always basically if you play 17 games and you're semi-decent, you settle in there. So I reckon that's where he'll probably settle in this year. And I think that hopefully next year he can kick on from that. But I think if you're expecting him to be a top 5 back over certainly this season, maybe even into next season, I think you probably need to cool the jets a little bit there. He's in an offense that, let's not forget, has added Russell Wilson and has got, an incredible set of weapons. When you look at Sutton, Judy, Hamler, Albert O, that Tim Patrick, like it's a very good receiving core. So this isn't going to be a team that's going to run the ball 30, 35 times a game.
So for when he goes into year 3, which would be next season, 2023, what do you project for that situation then? Because as you said, you can kind of see him having a bit more of a role than he will have this year and slowly creep up in opportunity share. But the one game where he had a 78% snap share, which is the only game he had over 60% snaps, he scored 29.8 fantasy points. And that is with nine targets, 100 yards rushing, 76 on the ground, and a touchdown. So do you foresee, I'm not saying that's going to be every game, obviously, but do you think that he's going to be a lot more consistent in those mid-teens, upper teens, pushing into the 20s, if he was to get, say, 75% opportunity share?
Let me just get my crystal ball out and try to get into the future. I think, look, a lot depends on basically what they bring in. In that, if they bring in another Melvin Gordon-like player in 2023, then I probably wouldn't be so confident that he's going to get that. I think if he gets a fully fledged role, he could be an absolute star. I just don't know if that's 100% going to happen. I'm sounding really, really negative about him, but I promise you I do like him. As I said, he is my RB6. I just think that there is quite a tier break for me between that top 5 and him at 6. And I've toyed over the last 48 hours between dropping him behind Austin Eckler.
Okay. I kind of like that, but I also think Eckler is pushing towards the end of his career now. And that's where I struggle with it. But points-wise, I can totally see it for the next season or at least 2 seasons, because I don't think Eckler's going anywhere, even though his contract does kind of make him a bit more cuttable next year. I don't think Eckler's going anywhere. Anyway, let's move on, Rich, because we've spent 25 minutes on the first 3 players, so we need to speed up a little bit. But I have a feeling we're going to speed through this one. So the next running back off the board was Trey Sermon in the 3rd round. Now, Rich, he didn't come out of nowhere. However, I don't think many people were expecting him in the 3rd round and be the only running back in the 3rd round last year. He went to the 49ers and everyone thought it was a great landing spot. And it kind of was, but not for him. He came into training camp and was beaten out by the 6th round Elijah Mitchell, who we'll cover a bit later on. And that is the end of his season, basically. He didn't really recover from getting beaten out in training camp. I mean, the highest snap shares he had were 59 and 51%, and that was in weeks 3 and 4. And I believe, I'm just double checking, that Elijah Mitchell was injured during those games. Yes, he was. So he was the only running back there, basically.
Yeah, I think, look, it comes down to basically with Trey Sermon, do you think there's a chance that he could carve out a role this year? And for me, the 49ers answered that by going and spending another third-round pick on a running back. You know, I didn't love Trey Sermon last year. He was my RB5 in rookie drafts. I had him behind Michael Carter, and I think that a lot of people overhyped that landing spot. And yes, it is an incredible landing spot, but as we've seen, you know, it's an incredible landing spot because they can do anything with anyone, basically. And I think that for me, Trey Sermon's basically now a roster clogger. I just can't see a world in which he becomes anything usable. I legitimately don't think I'd pay a third to acquire him right now. I think, yeah, if someone offered me Trey Sermon for a third, I think I'd probably decline. And this is a guy that I don't value third and fourth round picks at all. So, yeah, I'm out on Trey Sermon. I've got no interest and think we can probably just move on.
I'm very similar. The only thing I will say is it's purely down to what Elijah Mitchell did last year and the fact that the 49ers brought in a new running back in. I've just checked the pronunciation, so I hope this is correct, but Tyrion Davis Price. So with bringing in Davis Price into the third round, I don't foresee a role for Sermon. I see Davis Price as being very similar to Sermon. And as you said, I think the 49ers answered the question on Sermon. I wouldn't be surprised if he's cut maybe after this season if he doesn't show anything, which is surprising for a third round rookie.
I wouldn't be shocked if he was one of these guys that gets traded in camp for a conditional 6th or a conditional 7th, that if he doesn't make the roster, doesn't turn into anything. Because, yeah, I don't really see a hole for him in that 49ers offense. But moving on to the 5th running back drafted, let's just say his value has changed slightly in the last 2 months. That's Michael Carter. Obviously had a decent rookie year, flashed quite well, particularly with Mike White in at quarterback. And then the Jets traded up and got Breece Hall in, and his value has somewhat plummeted. So what do you think of Michael Carter? Do you think he's still going to have a role, or do you think he's just going to be potentially a high-end handcuff?
I do think he's going to have a role. I have no idea what that role is going to be. I'm going to take a guess at third as a third down back, but this is your team, Rich. I don't know why you're asking me questions on who's going to have what role when you are much more clued in on the Jets. I think that Carter going forward in fantasy purposes is a great kind of back to try and hedge your bets on, because if in the unfortunate circumstances where Breece Hall goes down, you know what you've got in Michael Carter. He's going to be a top 24 back. He's going to step in and be able to do everything he's already done last season. And now that offense has had a step up in terms of the talent that they've brought in. So I think that Michael Carter still has a role. And I think that the community maybe is undervaluing that role slightly, and that the hype, or what's the opposite of hype, has gone too far. The hate, I suppose, has gone too far on Michael Carter. But Rich, I know you're dying to talk about him because you get to talk about Breece Hall. So take it away, mate.
I think that for me, I'm the kind of opposite of you. I think that his value is still too high. I think that people are holding out hope that he's going to carve out a third down role. But to me, Breece Hall is a fantastic receiving back. And I think that every time you're taking Breece Hall off the field, it's a step down. I think that in year one, I've said that I expect the Jets' backfield usage to mirror what the Colts did in Jonathan Taylor's rookie year. So where Jonathan Taylor started off as a kind of a 50-50 and gradually picked up more work as the season went on, and Michael Carter in that kind of Nyheim Hines role. Now, I like Michael Carter, the player, but this is always the risk of a day 3 running back that is undersized, that's always going to have the chance for somebody to come in and kind of usurp him. I think for me, I'd basically value Michael Carter now as a younger Alexander Madison. I think he is going to be an elite handcuff. I think he's an elite backup, but I don't think he's going to have a huge amount of standalone value. I don't think he's going to be like a Kareem Hunt that you can still start on a weekly basis, or a James White on the hope that they get 6 or 7 targets. I think for me, Michael Carter's going to be, one week he might get 5 or 6 targets and six or 7 rushing attempts and finish it with a good week. But I then wouldn't be shocked if the following week he had 2 and 2 and put up a donut in terms of fantasy points. So yeah, I'm concerned. I'd sell now for pretty much any 2023 second round pick straight up for Michael Carter. And I think people would probably still happily pay that for you right now.
So if you think that Hall is going to be slowly brought in and it's going to be a gradual takeover, well, do you think that Michael Carter is a better sell at the start of the season, or do you think right now it's just better to get what you can and cut ties with that completely in case that bet is kind of wrong?
I think it depends. I think it depends on what you can get. As I said, I think if you can get a second for Michael Carter now, a 2023 seconds, I'd pull the trigger on that personally. But if you can't get that and you hold out for the beginning of the season, he has a couple of decent starts, Breece Hall is a little bit slow out the gates, then yeah, maybe you can have get a bit more. The thing for me is I think that this Jets offense, in terms of the running game, I've been very sad and gone back and watched each game from the Jets twice so far this offseason. But I think that the run, I came away really impressed with the offensive scheme in terms of the running game. I think they schemed up to get the guys in position really well. I think the problem was that the backfield was a joke, and you had old man Tevin Coleman, you had Austin Walter at one point as the leading rusher, and I think that was the problem. I think they had 2 gaping holes on the offensive line, but what the scheme was doing was actually very good. And I think that, the Jets have reinvested in the offensive line again this year. The Jets have now brought in Breece Hall. I think this offensive running game is going to be very good. And I think that if Michael Carter gets a chance early in the year, I wouldn't be shocked if he had a couple of maybe 1 or 2 good games, and it gives you a sell window on Michael Carter and a buy window on Breece Hall. Because I think for me, in a year's time, I think we're going to be sitting here talking about Breece Hall as, Jonathan Taylor 2.0. And I think Michael Carter is probably going to be sitting in that Nyheim Hines role where you can't give him away for toffee.
So let's move on, Rich. The next running back was Ramondre Stevenson. He went to the Patriots, and I don't know about you, I wasn't a huge fan of him going into the draft, and this landing spot didn't really change. It would change that. So the interesting thing about Stevenson is he wasn't horrendous. He did well when he got given the opportunity, but Damian Harris was the lead back there. He's the one to own. Now, with Ramondre Stevenson and that entire Pats backfield, you've also now got Pierre Strong and Kevin Harris, both drafted this year. I believe it was in the 4th and the 6th round. So it's not like they're top premium backs, but we know what this backfield does. You've also got James White coming back to snap up all of those targets. So what do you foresee for Stevenson? Because pre-draft, I couldn't give him away for a second. Like, I thought that was pretty fair value pre-draft. Now I can't get him. I can't see a world where I can give him away for a third.
See, I am really intrigued, and I really like Ramondre Stevenson. I think that perhaps I'm too infatuated with, I love a bigger back that can catch the ball, and that's exactly what he is. And I think that he's got the potential to take over this backfield. The problem is you've just listed 5 running backs there. Like, do we know who's going to be, is Damien Harris going to get all the work? Is James White going to settle back into his third down role? Is Ramondre Stevenson basically going to end up the year with like 100 rushing attempts, 30 targets, and be nothing but a roster clogger? That's probably the most likely outcome. I do like taking a punt on him. I've certainly got quite a few shares that I've picked up this offseason. I'd happily pay anything less than a second. I've picked him up for 2/3 in a couple of places. I've picked him up for a third and KJ Hamler. Like I quite like taking a punt on him just because I think that the running game is always going to be important in that Mac Jones-led offense. And I think that Ramondre Stevenson is kind of a Damien Harris injury away from potentially being a league winner. So I'm happy taking a punt on him. He's basically, to me, in that same high-end backup tier, though. So he's in the same tier as, Michael Carter, Tony Pollard, Alexander Madison, those kind of guys that you're basically an injury away from real fantasy success. But as I said, he's young, he's big, he can catch the ball, so I'm worth taking a flyer on him.
See, as I said, I tried selling him before the draft. I've tried selling him after the draft. I can't get anywhere with it. I think for the price that you're buying, I'm holding everywhere.
Needs to be in more leagues with me, Liam. I'd happily buy him off you for less than a second.
I don't think I'd be selling him for less than a second, purely because of that upside. But 2/3 we could maybe talk, but we're not in enough leagues and together at least. And I don't have him in any of the leagues, I believe, that we're in. So let's move on, Rich. You've got Chuba Hubbard next. Now, this one, he had his shot last year and he didn't really do anything with it. So he went to the Panthers and the lead back there, Christian McCaffrey, went down through injury. And Chuba Hubbard had a few games where he had the opportunity to take over and he just didn't. Now, Rich, what are you doing with him? Because I think if you've got him, he's, dare I say it, nearly a drop candidate. I mean, Christian McCaffrey going down led Mike Davis to have an absolutely amazing season for against expectations, should we say. Now, I'm saying that Chuba Hubbard didn't really do anything. He has had multiple games over 10 points where he was targeted bunch and scored touchdowns here and there. But I can't foresee a world where the Panthers trust him again now that he's kind of lost that trust. They brought in Donta Foreman this offseason, who came back from his Achilles injury a few years back with the Titans last season and took over from Derrick Henry's role and looked really good down the stretch for the limited time that he had. So do you foresee Foreman's role basically, or Foreman being brought in to take over what Chuba Hubbard could have had if he had done more consistent work last season?
Yeah, I basically think that Chuba Hubbard is, I'm not dropping him, but I don't think he's worth particularly rushing him. I'd sell happily for a third. I'd probably sell for less than that, to be honest. I think, you mentioned he had his opportunity last year. That week 3 to week 8 stretch, he had over 50% snap share in every game. He had 2 games where he saw 24 rushing attempts. He didn't finish with a top 15 week, despite the fact that he did have the opportunity to, basically take over that backfield, and he didn't show. And I think that anytime you've basically got a backup, which is what he is, Christian McCaffrey is quite clearly ahead of him, and you're relying on an injury. And even when Christian McCaffrey went down, he didn't take hold of that backfield, and he wasn't, hugely fantasy relevant. He had 4 top 24 weeks. He didn't have a single top 12 week. I don't really want a guy that I'm relying on an injury And even when there's an injury, he's only going to be his upside is kind of an RB2. So if I don't want any part of him, I'd happily sell him and take a punt on another player. I just think he's, he had that incredible, I want to say sophomore season where he had 2,000 rushing yards in college and then disappeared at the end of his final year in college. And it shows that final year was the real Chuba Hubbard, because he certainly didn't impress last year in the NFL. So I want no part of him. I'd happily, if I could sell him for a Pierre Strong, a Tyler Badie, someone like that, I'd be doing that all day.
Okay, so let's move on, because the next player on the list is my favourite player on the list, Kenneth Gainwell. He was my running back darling coming into last year. He was taken in the 5th round, which broke my heart when I was watching the draft. Now, Rich, I want to throw some stats at you and let's see whether I can change your mind, because I already know that you're not a huge fan of Kenneth Gainwell. However, let's see if I can throw some stats. So he had a 26% snap share last season in 15 games. He started none of them because he has Miles Sanders in front of him. Miles Sanders was injured for a decent portion of last season, which causes some concern. But my biggest thing with Kenneth Gainwell is his fantasy points per touch during the entire last season was more than anyone else in this rookie class, in the 2021 rookie class, at the running back position. Let's just clarify that. So he has 1.2 fantasy points per touch. In the rest of this class, the next highest is Michael Carter at 0.9, and then a few backs at 0.8. So Nargie Harris, Javonte Williams, Elijah Mitchell. So that is where I'm starting. And then I'm going to throw this one at you as well. So he saw a 10.7% target share last season. Now, only one running back in this 2021 class saw more, and that was Nargie Harris, because of what we spoke about earlier. Now, with their off-season, the Eagles' off-season, they haven't really done anything running back-wise. They've not been in the news at all, really. So for me, I'm expecting a good jump this season from Gainwell. I think it's going to be Sanders' last season in the starting role. And although I wanted Gainwell to be a lot more than I probably think he's going to be now, I think that he's got the upside of being a 1A, 1B role and being that third down back and being lined up outside of the backfield a lot more often than people think. But to give clarification to the listeners, last season, he didn't do very well at all. He ended the season as the PPR running back 42. He only had 5 games over 10 points, 10 fantasy points in PPR, and they all came from when he scored a touchdown. So, Rich, I've thrown a lot of stats at you. From your face, take it away with why I am way too high on Gainwell, even coming into this season, when you can probably get him in the 13th, 14th round, maybe. Yeah. I haven't got the ADP in front of me right now.
I just don't know what potential upside you're hoping for. I think that the best case scenario for Kenny Gainwell is that he is a good complementary back. And I don't think he is ever going to be more than that. We have already talked so far this episode about what happened with Michael Carter as a day 3 running back that isn't equipped to have a full 3-down role and has been replaced within a year. Yes, the Eagles have got Miles Sanders, but I wouldn't be shocked if he moves on, if they come in and bring somebody in to usurp both of them next year. And I just don't know if Kenny Gainwell's ever going to be anything more than a complementary piece. yes, he'll absolutely have some flash weeks where he'll catch 6 or 7 passes, a touchdown, and put up a really nice fantasy week. But I don't think he's ever going to be someone that you can reliably start. And I think even if there was an injury to Miles Sanders, I can't foresee Kenny Gainwell being that huge feature back. So I'm concerned. I certainly, I'm lower than consensus on him. I get the appeal in terms of his potential of what he can do with the ball in his hands, but I just don't know if he's ever going to be able to carve out. I don't think he's so electric that, he can be like a Darren Sproles was, where he can take 10 touches and be an absolute fantasy star. I don't see that for Kenny Gainwell. I think he is going to be nothing more than a RB3, RB4 for the rest of his career, and I just can't pay up for that. I would much rather take guys in his tier in terms of price range that I think have got potential to become a feature back. I would much rather a Brian Robinson or someone like that, or a Khalil Herbert that we'll come to shortly, over Kenny Gainwell for me.
I will point out that I have Khalil Herbert and Ramondre Stevenson above him. However, I just think that all of these stats are not predicative, but show the upside that he can have. And that's kind of what I'm buying at the RB40 price that I've got him in my rankings at.
I would say you also find that a lot of backs, particularly in reduced roles, have incredible efficiency stats. I remember Gus Edwards, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago, he averaged like 8 yards a touch, because Kenny Gainwell was probably getting the ball on 3rd and 20. He's being handed the ball and he's picking up 15 yards on a draw and situations like that. I think you find quite often that guys in reduced roles have far better efficiency than someone who's having to carry the rock 20 times a game.
Okay, I'm going to stop you from breaking my heart now, Rich, and let's move on. So the next one on our list is the biggest surprise from this draft, and that's Elijah Mitchell. We've spoken about him briefly in a couple of other players' talks, but Elijah Mitchell came basically out of nowhere. I mean, he was a guy that I was targeting in the 4th round of rookie drafts last year because I liked his profile and he went to a decent landing spot. If he could become that one, and he did. I'm not saying that is a foolproof process because it's pure luck at this point. I don't think anyone really expected Elijah Mitchell to beat out Trey Sermon, the third round running back in camp, let alone going into the season. So Elijah Mitchell, for me, I find it difficult because I feel like that backfield had so many injuries that led him to become fantasy relevant, that is not the only reason that he's there, but is a big reason that he was where he's being drafted right now as well. So you had, correct me if I'm wrong, Rich, we had Jeff Wilson in front of him at the start of the season. He was injured. You had Raheem Mostert. You had Trey Sermon, who wasn't injured, but as we've already spoken about, didn't really impress. So you had a bunch of guys in front of him that either got injured or didn't impress, and he was kind of the last person standing. And if Paul Picken is listening, he's going to, I'm sure I'm going to get a message from him because Elijah Mitchell is his guy. But I think with the 49ers taking a 3rd round rookie running back, that kind of says what we need to know about Elijah Mitchell's potential or usage this year. I think it's going to go down. So last year he had all of his games that he played in were over 50% snap share, or most of them were over 60% or over 65%. And he didn't play in 3, 4, 5, 6 games. So I think when he played, he showed up. But do you factor that to the scheme? where are you trying to take him in drafts at the moment? Because I feel that I would much rather have a lot of guys around him in ADP than him himself.
I really like Elijah Mitchell. I think he's a great player because he's the back in a San Francisco 49ers scheme, and we talk about every year for, I think it's the last 4 years, if you add up the lead back for every game, they've been a top 3 fantasy back on the season. So if you can, harness the RB1 for this 49ers and they stay healthy, then it's absolute fantasy gold. I think that for me, I am buying into the potential dip in value because that's the concern, is that everybody's concerned that he's going to be replaced. And I think that there is the opportunity that he could easily outperform his price. It is not without risk because, as we saw with Trey Sermon last year, there is easily a chance where, Elijah Mitchell turns up late for a meeting and then he's in Kyle Shanahan's doghouse and doesn't play again for the rest of the year. So there is a huge amount of risk. But I just think that the risk reward for me is potentially massive. So I really like him at a value. I really like him where he's going. And I'm pretty happy taking that risk. But I'm comfortable knowing where I'm taking him, it is a risk. And, you've kind of got to weigh that up of, is my roster in a position where I can afford to take this risk? I probably wouldn't pay a 2023 first for him. I'd pay a first if I was getting maybe a second back, something like that. Maybe I'd pay a first and a third if I was getting a second back for him. But I think that he's got the potential to finish as a top 5 fantasy back this year. And I don't know how many other guys you can honestly say that about in the range where he is going.
I think the issue I have is the safety net that you have on him. Now, I'm not a guy that when it comes to my RB2 is concerned about a safety net. However, I think Elijah Mitchell's range of outcomes is completely wild compared to anyone else in his range. So I'm not looking at ADP. I'm looking at our consensus rankings, Rich. You've got David Montgomery around that range. You've got, I'm trying to pick players that you've got ranked around or behind Elijah Mitchell that I've kind of got in front as well. So Josh Jacobs is one, but I would much prefer over Elijah Mitchell just because of the wide variety of outcomes. And as you said, you're basically betting or hedging your bets that Elijah Mitchell is going to be the running back 1 in that backfield. And I don't think he is going to be that for a good portion of this season, which for a running back 2 in there, what basically when you're trying to build your roster, he's going in that RB2, maybe you get him as an RB3, but he's going in that range, and that's kind of what you want. I would much rather take a, dare I say, James Conner or Leonard Fournette, because I just feel like their upsides, even though they're older, I feel like they're all very similar situations in that they could all be running back top 6, maybe top 3 running backs any given week. But I feel like their safety nets are a lot higher than Elijah Mitchell.
Yeah, I completely get it. I think it depends a lot where your roster is at. I think for me, Elijah Mitchell is the perfect guy to go and target if you're, in that retooling category. If you're perhaps got an aging roster that kind of needs to win now, but you're not an absolute contender, maybe you need to go and take a punt on someone like Elijah Mitchell that's got that elite upside that can be that riskier play that could, the reward could be huge. But if it doesn't turn out, then you're just in a rebuild scenario. So I like the risk, I like the price, but you've got to go into it knowing the potential risk.
Okay, so let's move on, Rich. I think we're going to skip through this one very quickly because there's not much to talk about. So Chris Evans is the next running back that we've got that was taken in the NFL draft last year. Now, he didn't really do anything all the way through the year. Probably taken as a 4th round rookie pick, if not a 5th round, or going undrafted, depending on how long your rookie drafts were. He had the max of 7 rushing attempts. He only had only recorded a rushing attempt in 4 games last season, Rich. He was more of a pass catching back, but that is loosely used. He eclipsed 3 targets just once at 5. He had 3 targets once and then a couple of 2s and a few 1s in there as well. So, Rich, I don't foresee Chris Evans being anything ever, unfortunately. That could come back to bite me. But the Bengals have shown that Samaje Perine is that number 2 backup role in case Mixon does go down. So I just don't foresee a future for Chris Evans in fantasy, at least.
No, I mean, he flashed in a reduced role last year when I think Mixon got injured, or he partnered with Perine in that 1 or 2 game stretch. But when you're 3rd on the depth chart and you are a pass game specialist, I don't foresee him ever carving out a massive role. You know, he's someone that I'd keep on the end of my bench, but if you're expecting him to turn into anything, you're probably, got the wrong expectations, quite frankly.
So that was short and sweet. That's probably the quickest player we've ever talked on in the history of the pod. Moving on to the very last guy that we've got on the list is Khalil Herbert. Now, he hasn't shown anything apart from that 4-game stretch where he had over 15 rushing attempts and had a great opportunity share because... What was that, sorry?
I said, I feel like that's a bit harsh. You said he hasn't shown anything except that 4-game stretch. Well, he's only a rookie. He only had 17 games. A 4-game stretch when you're the clear backup is a decent stretch.
I'm coming to it, Rich. Let me get there. So in that 4-game stretch, he did become a great waiver wire pickup in a lot of leagues if he wasn't already taken in your dynasty leagues. He scored 18 and 19 fantasy points in 2 of those 4 games, both of which, only one of which had a touchdown. So that takes away that point. But in those games, he was extremely efficient on the ground, or extremely productive on the ground. Sorry, not efficient. He was kind of used in a pass catching role during those games, but that's about it. I mean, outside of those 4 games, once David Montgomery came back, there wasn't much else to speak of. The snap share went right down. So during those 4 games, he had a 50% snap share during week 5, which is where Montgomery went down for an injury. The next 3 weeks, he had 89, 77, and 84% snap share. And then after that, it went right down and he didn't eclipse 25 after that point. So to me, he is a clear, great upside backup. And I think that's kind of what you're expecting from, or what you're hoping for from a 4th round rookie pick. But I think with Herbert, if you're expecting anything more, you may need to look at the stats again.
I'm going to disagree in that I really like Khalil Herbert. I think that he showed enough in that 4-game stretch that I think he's going to be their lead running back next year. I think that we talked about this. We talked about this with Justin Fields, that the Bears are in a strange situation where, the previous regime had bet the future and kind of that last roll of the dice on Justin Fields to basically try and keep their jobs. They traded the 2022 first-round pick to move up to get Fields. That didn't work. The roster is in a complete shambles. They've got, huge amounts of dead caps that they're spending this year. And this regime has basically come in and said, we're not going to spend any more cap money. We're not going to kind of trade into this draft. We're going to start our rebuild from 2023. So David Montgomery is a free agent after this year. I think David Montgomery is gone. I do not foresee Chicago re-signing him. And I think that a team, when it's starting that rebuild outside of Seattle, I don't foresee them spending high draft capital at running back. I think running back is one of those pieces that you add in late. You know, you look at the Jets, they spent a day 3 pick on Michael Carter, and then they're a year further on, and then they go and add someone. So I think that Khalil Herbert, if you would say to me what is his percentage chance that he's the RB1 in 2023, I personally would say greater than 50%. So I think that Khalil Herbert is a sneaky buy that could give you some decent handcuff, decent backup now, that could potentially be a, you know, I don't want to say the name because I feel like they're different players. I feel like it gets overhyped, but I feel like he could potentially have an Austin Eckler-like career where he sits away, toils away for the first 2 years on special teams and as a backup, and then he gets that opportunity. And I'm not comparing him to Austin Eckler because Austin Eckler was incredible in a reduced role where he was incredibly efficient in the passing game. That's not Khalil Herbert, but I think that Khalil Herbert could show some flashes again this year, and then 2023, that's where you're getting a dirt cheap, potentially RB2 for fantasy.
So I'm not a huge fan of that take. However,
that's the nicest thing you've ever said to me.
I'm not a huge fan of the take. I can see him becoming like a 1A, 1B, but I can't foresee him doing much else outside of that. Yeah, I think that's all I've got to say on him, really. He's got great upside for when he gets the opportunity, but I really do think that his upside is going to be a more 1A, 1B role, and probably the 1B in that style offense.
Fair enough.
That's just a projection. I don't have a crystal ball. That's it.
Well, that's it. I've put my crystal ball away after we talked about Julie Williams, so I better go dig it out the cupboard. Yeah, we'll leave it there. We'll agree to disagree. I won't basically repeat myself again. But look, it's a massive punt. But I think at the price you're having to pay, you know,
I like the value play.
Probably a third, maybe a third, and a player, maybe 2/3, something like that.
I like the value play. Yeah. I like the idea of picking him up to then sell him on next year when David Montgomery hasn't been re-signed. And even if he has, you haven't really lost anything because his value isn't going to go down by so much that you're losing out on a third. I like that side of it. I just don't think that he's going to be a clear one. But Rich, before we sign off, there's one more player that I'm going to mention because he is a Packer, but I'm going to end it short and sweet because he had an injury, and I don't want people to forget that we have. What is that?
I kept him off because I didn't want to mention him. But yeah, go on. You can have some Packer love.
I only want to mention him because I don't want people thinking that we haven't done our homework or we don't know our stuff. So Kylin Hill was a 7th round pick. He got injured on an awful. No one's fault, but awful play that was quite scary at the time. And he didn't really do anything in his rookie season because of that injury. He was kind of limited to special teams. I think going forward, I'm not expecting anything from him. If you've got him, he is one of Richie's roster cloggers. But yeah, he's got AJ Dillon, Aaron Jones in front of him. And I can see when Aaron Jones does go either next year or the year after, with the Packers taking a running back in the draft to replace Jones. So if you want to add anything, you are more than welcome to. I just wanted to make sure the listeners knew that we actually did know our stuff and we haven't just missed off a guy that was drafted.
Well, we've missed off 7 guys because there was 18 running backs drafted last year. But I tried to only include the ones that I thought were interesting and relevant because, let's be honest, people don't really need to hear us talk about Kylin Hill, do they? So, yeah.
But I wanted some Packer love, especially with the T-shirt that I'm wearing. So you saw through my plan completely. Anyway, Rich, jam-packed show, completely over. We're about 5 minutes over, but that'll do. So the one thing we wanted to plug before we went was the UK FFC. If you are in the UK, me, Rich, Dan, the host of the flagship show, and Pitsy, one of the great writers, and I believe also edits for 5 Yard, have all banded together, and I'm sure you've heard us speak about it before, but banded together to create the first fancy expo style event in the UK. As I said, we're calling it the UK FFC. If you are interested, there are going to be stalls, panels. There are a whole list of panelists that we are revealing. That some of them are already out there. So make sure you go to @_UKFFC on Twitter. All the information is there. If you want more information, message us on there and one of us will respond. But Rich, nothing else from you?
Nothing else from me.
Just the listener league from Rich. Then, if you are interested, make sure you drop him a message on Twitter @Dynasty Island. And until then, guys, have a great week. See you then.